latest discussion on a book. This time it's a book called The Unbroken Thread, Discovering the Wisdom of Tradition in an Age of Chaos. And it's by a man called Sohrab Ahmari. He is American, although he was born in Iran, and he left Iran at the age of 13 and went to live in America with his family. He was originally a Muslim, but as he grew up he became an atheist, and then eventually he became a Catholic. And he wrote this book because he was aware of the confusion of children growing up, the confusion in our world, and the difficulty that people have now in this modern society of finding some way to, some solid foundation in which to build their life. And he wanted to give his children some advice and speak to them about the virtues as a way of building their life and forming themselves, taking responsibility for their life. And his approach is, it's very much virtue-based, which is not common in our modern society, which seems to have moved away from that. It's much more in terms of discovering who you are rather than in terms of forming who you want to be according to some ideal. And John Paul, you're going to answer all the questions this time as a father, because we thought that since this was a book written by a father for his children, just to see what impact it can have, if it has anything to offer to parents as they struggle with this most difficult of tasks of bringing up children. John Paul, were you challenged by this book? Did it make you confront and ask questions about being a father yourself, and that how you approach your children and try to help them as they grow?
Yeah, I think the book is very well written, and I think having the opportunity to engage with a book that basically challenges us to think as parents about the chaos, because that's what's in the title, that children face, and how parents can actually help almost try and be an antidote to that chaos as much as possible through teaching virtues. I found it quite a useful book personally, because you don't often get books of this nature which engage with parenting issues, but also thinking about how that relates to the modern culture that we're living through. So I felt as a parent it was a good opportunity actually to read the book, because it made me sit up and think about my own behaviour as a parent, and think about the ways in which I can engage my children in some of the conversations about how do we deal with some of the complexities around social media, the complexities about the world we're faced with. So yeah, I think having the opportunity to reflect through this type of reading can be a good exercise.
I suppose as a parent as well, life can be so busy that you don't always get the opportunity to reflect. You don't get the space, the time to sort of sit back and say, how should I go about parenting?
Yes.
It's very much crisis management, isn't it?
It can be, and it can be quite chaotic. And because at the end of the day, you've got jobs, you've got school, you've got extracurricular activities, you've got all these things, and all parents face those challenges. And I think opportunities to reflect are a good thing, and even to sit down with the children and say, oh, look what I've read, here's what I've taken from this. Having the space to do that, I think, is really important. And the opportunity to actually speak to your children about some of the bigger questions. I've actually found that it's the children that come to the parents about some of the more fundamental questions. Children have what we might think are very basic questions about life and about society, but they can often be really, really profound and not always easy to answer. But I think what this book does, through the virtue-based approach, is give parents some of the knowledge and some of the tips and techniques that can allow us to say to our kids, well, here are the virtues how can you use them and apply them to your life? And that's as useful for as much the parent as much as for the child.
So, are you ready then to delve a bit more deeply into some of the issues that he deals with in this book?
I'll try. I certainly will, and absolutely. I think all parents have their own style, don't they? They have their own relationship with their children and all the rest of it. So this is very much my own view, but I think it's useful to kind of situate my experience within this broader book's context.
So maybe we should make clear, this isn't a guidebook for how to parent.
No.
And we're not trying to say this is how you should parent.
I've not seen a book that's written about that I would value, to be honest with you. There's so many of them out there.
So this is just to make us stop and think and see, well, has he got any insights into help?
Yeah, it's a letter to his children about some of the challenges of the modern culture and the modern life. And he ends the book actually with, it's a very brief letter to his children to say, here are the things that I suggest that you think about during the course of your life based on the author's experience, and now he's a parent, he's able to impart some of that knowledge. And a big thing that comes out from that is wisdom and the ability to think through how to navigate some of the life's challenging and changing circumstances. And he does take a faith-based approach to that.
Okay, let's have a closer look at some of the things he's raised, some of the issues he's raised.
Okay.
So one of the things that struck me was that he was quite concerned for his children, and I think a lot of parents share the concern of bringing up children in this modern age. So do you think, first of all, that it's important for you as a father to give your children a foundation, or should they just sort of experience life for themselves and go on with it?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think a parent is the first teacher of their child, and I think that when it comes to parenting, there's so many challenges that parents have, you know, when it comes to the character development of their children, dealing with modern society, dealing with the challenges that brings. But for me as a parent, I think it's absolutely crucial for me to give guidance to my children. I've got two children, and they're both very different personalities, and indeed they have their own ways and their own interests, but fundamentally it's my job as a parent to provide guidance to the children. And I think most parents would hopefully recognise that message, you know, Christian or not, that there needs to be some kind of guidance and shaping of your children. Now, what I would say is that I'm very mindful as a Christian of my behaviour, because it's obvious to me, and actually this has been confirmed in academic studies as well. We were talking about a study that came out of the Arizonian Christian University recently about the fact that children have their character formed at a younger age than we might think. I think oftentimes we think that, you know, children come into their own when they're teenagers and when they're developing interests, hobbies, socialising in different ways. But actually, children learn right from wrong from a very early age. It can even be around the 5, 6, 7 years. And of course, when children are babies, you know, we try and say, oh, don't do that, don't put your hand near the fire, don't behave this way at the dinner table and so on. So from a very young age, I think guidance and structure is very important for the development of children, but I think we also have to be mindful as parents with regards to how we lead and how we behave, because children will mimic what parents do. And if we don't offer children the opportunities for growth in their life, then where else are they going to get it from? Of course, we might come on to talk about this, but there is the education system, there's church itself. But fundamentally, it's parents that are the facilitators to a children's life. So I believe that the answer to that question is absolutely. As a parent, I feel it's a duty to provide guidance and leadership for the children and within the family environment as well. And that's a negotiated process because we're all human beings, and it might be that you have to adjust your style or your strategy once you get to know what works for your child. And sometimes you have to be gentle in your approach to leadership in order to actually get the best results and encourage through doing that. So absolutely, I think within this, as the book talks about, this chaotic age, sometimes you've really got your parents to fall back on. And it's a huge responsibility. I remember when my daughter was born, my first child, when she was born, I remember an overwhelming feeling of joy. And then about 30 seconds later, I had an overwhelming sense of responsibility. And I think that's something that's natural. And I think there's something there that it comes from the heart, that responsibility. And it's something we have to think about through our children's lives.
I think, children growing up, I suppose there's so much they're experiencing is new, and they have to make sense of it somehow or other. And I also feel in this age of chaos that a lot of adults have difficulty in making sense of their life. Mm-hmm. So this book, the author's approach, it was strongly virtue-based. Yeah. So he wanted to sort of say to his children, look, these virtues are worthwhile having in your life. In our more modern society, I think that's not so common. People have abandoned virtues. Yeah. So it is for a parent who perhaps themselves that find or struggle to make sense of life, to have an order in their life. Mm-hmm. That must be a difficult thing for them to sort of say, well, to their child, or, this is how you go about living your life. Yeah. How have you approached it? Did you value this virtue-based society that he's proposing?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of sympathy with the arguments that are made in the book about the virtues, and I recognise what you're saying as well about if you're going to lead by example here, if you're a parent that doesn't necessarily think deeply about the virtues, then what impact is that going to have on your child? And I think for me as a parent, I wouldn't say I'm perfect, because nobody is, right? But one thing I do try and do with my children is to get them to think about relationships and the impact that their language and their actions have on others. So for me, it's about accountability, not in any kind of harsh way, but to get the children to realise that for every action there is an outcome, and that could be within the family environment. It could be through if you say something negative to for my daughter, for instance, if she says something negative to her brother, that's going to prompt a reaction, and then there's chaos because there's a fight ensues and all the rest of it. But to get the kids to step back and reflect and think about their actions and say, well, what could you have done differently in that situation? And also think about charity as well. Think about the people that have less than we do. We're quite fortunate, and I come from a very austere background, but now working as an academic and all of that, I'm very fortunate. But one of the things that I try and instill in my kids is the fact that you're very fortunate as to where you're at, because you've not had to experience the things that perhaps I had to experience growing up. So for me, it's a sense of, dare I say the word, being mindful. I know mindfulness is a thing that's taken hold and in some ways been taken into a different territory from what we think about. But I think it is also about being mindful. I think it's about being reflective about how your actions have an impact on other people, and the parent has to be the one that is there to guide and support.
one of the things you mentioned, the study that came out from the university in America, and one of the things they said was important was consistency, and they suggested that when a parent is not consistent, it just adds to the sense of confusion in the child, because they hear the parent saying one thing and see them doing something else.
Yes.
So they find, well, life is confusing enough, and so they then look for an answer somewhere else.
Yeah.
And very often they find the answer in social media. But social media, for me just now, social media is full of this idea of discovering yourself and being true to yourself. And I'm sure that you're not suggesting that our whole morality is based on consequentialism. That's that, it's not about, well, this is the result of it. If it's a good result, then this is what we'll do. Modern morality, and as it's presented in social media, it seems to me, is very much about discovering who you are, and everything's all right as long as you're true to that. How you've discovered yourself. Is it possible for us, is it necessary, is it important for us to say to children, no, there is a right and there is a wrong, there is truth and there are lies, there's good and there's evil, there's, to give them some sort of firm basis, because it seems that that's what people are searching for, but adults seem to have abandoned that in so many ways, and say, well, I've looked and I can't find that consistency, whether it's in the church and government and institutions.
Yeah.
So is there a way that we can approach this, as just in handing on something to children, saying, no, there is something worthwhile pursuing here?
Absolutely. I think social media is a challenge, isn't it? Because of the voices you've got, as you say, the messages around your own truth, self-determination, not having to necessarily have a set of values and telling right from wrong, and in many ways some institutions like the media and the corporations themselves have actually made a lot of money out of providing that confusion to people because of just the nature of the way that news is reported. This whole idea of the post-truth society, which has become a phrase that gets bandied about now, and that's quite difficult for academics, because we work on evidence as best we can. But from a parental point of view, well, you mentioned the church and structures. I think that's where structures can come into their own and be truly valuable. When it comes to saying, right, okay, how do we discern and think about what's right and wrong? For those parents you've mentioned that might not really know themselves, I think there's an opportunity for the church to think about, how do we reach those people? Parents are important, but parents need support as well. So I think that when it comes to being a parent, there's no doubt that children will use social media these days. If most kids above the age of, well, goodness knows how old they are now, it's getting younger and younger. But normally once you get to the double figures, kids are using phones, WhatsApp, Instagram, all these different things. So they are exposed, but the parents have to give children the tools to negotiate their way through that. And sometimes it comes down to speaking to your children and saying, well, what have you learned from looking at that? What have you taken from these engagements with social media? Because to be honest with you, I think it is quite easy, and this might be a controversial point, but I think it's quite easy for parents not to talk to their children anymore, because the parents are on their phones, the kids are on their phones, and then it's like, okay, dinner time, bath time, bed, no opportunity for discussion. And sometimes what you find, and I've been guilty of this as well, just through looking at emails on my phone, work related, I could be sitting at the dinner table and I'm distracted. I'm looking at a device or something, and you think, well, the dinner table is an opportunity for conversation. And within that space, there is an opportunity to actually say, well, how was your day? What did you engage with on social media? What have you taken from it? There's endless opportunities to do it, but I think it's about making time and being reflective about that stuff.
Mm.
But there really is an opportunity, I think, for us to think more generally about social media, because one of the things that that is true, I think, is that the post-Christian and the, how would you say, as you said before, the kind of identity politics and the kind of my truth stuff, that those voices are much louder than the Christian voices on social media. So I think there needs to be a way, and this is going beyond parenting obviously, this is more of a systemic issue, but a way for us to actually have that conversation as a church.
But I think you mentioned the a systemic issue. What about the government? There's talk now of social engineering. Clearly we're in a stage in society where we're undergoing massive changes in understanding of what it means, I suppose, to be a human being, what life is about. And you occasionally hear people suggesting, now whether it's paranoia and social media or not, but they say a lot of this is government social engineering. And I suppose in education as well. When I was at school, which wasn't so long ago, it was, what I remember was you were taught how to read, you were taught how to write, you were taught how to count. So the 3 R's, as they called them.
Yeah.
But now, when you go into a primary school, there is so much asked of teachers, and it's almost as if the government has said, parents are not educating their children in these other aspects. So the government is now going to step in and educate the children. But they are approaching it from, I suppose, a particular ideology. Now, have parents got a responsibility to engage with that, do you think? Or should they just sort of say to the government is doing this, I don't know what I'm doing about it. So, and it's, obviously certain conversations that you have with children are embarrassing, awkward. So let the government get on with it.
Yeah, there's so much in that. And I think, so you started by talking about the nature of the curriculum, and then thinking about the role of the parent versus the teacher, and the teachers being overburdened, and I recognise all of that. I think at a curriculum level, what I would say is there's lots that could be looked at there in terms of the nature of what children are being taught, but not just what they're being taught. It's almost like the methodology and the lens that's been applied to certain subjects. So, if you take something like, obviously we're talking, we've got Catholic schools obviously, and my children are in a Catholic school, so that I've got a certain perspective. But if children are being taught about history, and they're being talking about social issues, or even world issues like, say, climate change, globalisation, looking at historical developments around the welfare state or post-war society, all these different things that children tend to be exposed to at school. One of the things that I would like to see, and this is talking about character formation and being able to tell right from wrong, is the opportunity to apply a moral lens to the issues that are being looked at any given time, be it climate change, be it globalisation. What are the moral consequences of these things, or what are the moral dimensions? So at a curriculum level, I think there's lots to think about in terms of how that's important for character formation, because then there's an opportunity for parents to get involved in some of that and understand through engaging with their child's education as to how that can be important for the parent and the child. In terms of the parent, lots of parents, some might be listening to this now, would turn around and say, well, we were the teachers during the pandemic. A lot of us were teaching our children, and we understand the chronic challenges of doing so, particularly in the home setting. But I think it's very important. It's very important for parents to be co-producers of education with the schools. And it's very important for parents to be on top of what the children are learning, and to be able to actually talk about it, perhaps even, dare I say it, support the homework, because one of the things that is difficult sometimes for parents is being able to accommodate that in the house and busy lives and all that. But look at my children, they don't get a huge amount of homework at the moment, and it doesn't translate to what I got when I was young. So I think the expectations on the children could be higher, if I'm honest, in terms of the nature of the work that they're asked to be doing, but also in terms of the lenses they're applying to their education through that moral perspective.
Do you think the church is supportive enough of parents, helping them to do that? Because what you're talking about, I suppose, I wonder if parents would know where to start.
Yeah.
So does the church need to do more in terms of helping parents to do that?
I think it's a tricky one in terms of what the church can be expected to do. With that, I think having the conversation and recognising what you've recognised, which is that sometimes parents need to be educated themselves, but where would they go? There are decent resources online these days. I mean, there's the Catholic Education Resource Centre. It's called catholiceducation.org. It's a really good website. There's plenty of other websites where you can get information about parenting and the context of the Christian life. But in terms of the church, I think having a dialogue with parents might be a good thing. I've not seen much of that myself, but I think there might be opportunities to think. And does that happen at a parish level? Does it happen at an archdiocese level? You might have your own views on that. But I think that there's always, the church is a living entity, isn't it? It doesn't stand still. So I think there's always opportunities for the church to engage with parents, with children. I also would like to see, this is my own view, what I was saying earlier about the voice of the church, on social media, the voice in civil society. I think sometimes there's been a bit of a tendency to stand back and let, almost not necessarily allow, but to witness the significant developments around what we've talked about, the post-truth society, and it's led to this chaos that the book writes about. I think we can be more assertive as Christians, not necessarily as in-your-face type of way, but try to actually say, well, actually these values matter, these virtues matter, and perhaps the church can be a useful mechanism for helping us to do that.
One of the I think lacks in our modern society is this approach to self-realisation that people have, as opposed to formation.
Yeah.
So that it's almost as if the self-realisation is you're stumbling along, and it's almost as if when you then suggest, well, perhaps you need to be formed in a particular way by these virtues or values, people are sort of saying, well, no, that's taking away my freedom to be myself. The Christian approach is, well, we are being formed in the image and likeness of Christ.
Yes.
Do you feel that already there is a resistance to that? Do you experience that in trying to get your children to understand the need, to understand that true freedom, their real freedom will come when they take ownership of themselves and decide what kind of person they want to be, rather than sort of saying, well, this is the type of person I'm in.
But that's a journey, and I think it's the role of the parents to set your child off on that journey. So an example would be, and I've had these debates with other parents, which is, okay, I send my children to Mass, but children come to Mass, right? And they have done from quite a young age. And I've had conversations with other parents that say, well, I'm not that bothered about, insisting that the children go to Mass if they don't want to, if they put up a fight or whatever. they can discover it themselves when they get to an age whereby they decide if they want to do that. My argument always is, to counter that, is that they don't know what they would be necessarily refusing or deciding to engage with in the future if they haven't had the opportunity to engage with it at a young age, because through your character development and growth, through the church and through that engagement, you get to a deeper understanding of the moral life. But if you were to say to a child, okay, we'll just let you go run free and then you can come and rediscover this yourself, well, where's the path? You know, where's the leadership? Where's the influence that can allow the child to do that? So, I mean, it might be that my children in the future decide to do something different, or they might be on a faith journey where they go up and down, like a lot of people do. But at least I can say that I've given them the tools and the freedom to make that choice. Freedom isn't something that's just there based on your whatever wish you've got at any given time. I think freedom has to be informed freedom. There has to be a path to freedom. And it might be that actually having the freedom to say no, actually, being a Catholic, being in church is for me. That's freedom. You know, I think there's different paths to this, and there's no right or wrong necessarily, but the first question was about moral leadership. I think having in place those nudges and saying, well, actually, not that I know it's best for you, but it's just about saying, my role as a parent is to facilitate and enable your character development within a Christian environment.
I feel a lot of parents might sort of say, but I would feel hypocritical. You know, I'd sort of going to mass or saying my prayers or doing it's not really me. And getting children to do that, well, that would be hypocritical of me, but also would I not just be teaching them to be hypocritical? So why not wait until I'm certain or I'm sure or I'm, you know, before sort of saying, well, this is what I should be doing.
But faith has uncertainty. You know, faith is a journey, and I think that we all have times where we struggle with our faith, but actually not actually allowing that path to faith, I think would be very immoral, to not allow that path to open up. It might be that, you know, that some might feel, you know, that they're being hypocritical, but what's the alternative? The alternative is not to expose your child to Christ, essentially. And you know, one of the things in Matthew's Gospel, what it says is, well, Jesus says to his disciples, you know, let the children come to me, you know. And I think that's actually something the parents can help with, you know. The parents can be that guide to say, well, there is a path to Christ. So there's complexities around it, and nobody's perfect. And again, I'm not perfect at all. I don't want to sound, you know, all kind of all-knowing here, because I'm not. Everyone's on a journey. But I do think that exposing your child to the faith is a good start for them, at least.
And we don't have to be perfect to live these values.
Absolutely.
If we recognise the importance of the values, the importance of these virtues for life, then we live them. If we fall down, if we fail, we get back up and we keep trying.
But that's also a useful parenting skill, isn't it? Is to say, well, sometimes we have to persevere in life. And it's a transferable skill, you know? It's not just about faith, it's also about how, you know, you can apply it to your work context, your education context. The ability to persevere, and also try not to be too cynical. Because I think there is a tendency, you know, we talked about social media before, where it's like we just kind of take what anyone says to us with a pinch of salt. We don't invest in relationships. Everything's surface level. I think it's important to not be too cynical, and actually equip your children with the wisdom to be able to negotiate change in life, because change is a constant in life, and it seems that everything's moving at 100 miles an hour. But having that wisdom, and I do believe that that virtue-based approach can help us in that journey.